Hello, Seaside Shadows followers, and welcome to Cemetery Saturday. It is me, Courtney, coming to you from the First Congregational Church Cemetery in East Haddam, Connecticut. And this is a beautiful spot tucked back here in East Haddam by the Connecticut River. And we are by a very notable grave belonging to a gentleman named Venture Smith and his wife, Meg, buried right next to him. Now, Venture and Meg are a story of resilience, endurance, and survival because they endured the unimaginable and the horrific and still made quite a name for themselves and an impact here that their descendants in the region still remember today. So Venture and Meg are both of African descent, and they were some of the first enslaved that were brought over to the New England area. Now, Venture's original name is Brotier Furrow. I'm saying that as best I can, Brotier Furrow, and I hope that's correct. And Brotier was from an area known in West Africa back in the 1700s when he was born, approximately 1729, as Guinea. Now, this is part of West Africa and the Savannah area by all accounts. Now, he was not from, poor family in West Africa. No, Brotier was of African royalty, and his father was a king, which would make him, in a sense, a prince. Now, in West Africa, tradition had it that men, especially had they a bit of money or position in the community, would have more than one wife, making them sort of polygamous in a way. But Brotier's father gets married to his first wife, and Brotier, who becomes Venture, is the firstborn. What happens, though, is after Brotier is born, his father marries a second wife without his first wife's permission. His first wife is so furious that she was not asked for permission that she takes Brotier and flees 140 miles away. And they stay on a land that's owned by a wealthy man who owns a great deal of farms, and Brotier works and manages the sheep farm. But what happens when Brotier's about 7 years old, there becomes an announcement that there's an invasion of foreigners, and there's thousands of them, and they're coming to start war, and they're under attack. Well, Brotier's father, being a king, offers safe housing and protection for everyone in the region. So Brotier and his mother come back to his father's position in the area, and while they're there with Sangam Furrow is his father's name, the village does get some invaders. And these invaders make a proposal to Sangam that they require payment. And Sangam, being the king, listens to their requirement. They want hundreds of cattle, horses, you name it. And if they are given this, then they will kill no one, take no one, and they will leave without war. Sangam decides that that's the only thing that he can do. So this African king provides these invaders, these seemingly white men, all of their request. But then they tell him that's not enough, that war will still happen. So immediately Sangam and his men begin to engage, and they're shooting arrows at some of these invaders, and suddenly there's 6,000 of them arriving in the coming days. And as this battle continues, eventually Sangam and his family are all captured. Now, Sangam is asked to tell the invaders, by asked, I mean tortured to tell the invaders where he had all his money, his riches, where that was hiding. He did not want to give away this information, and he believed that his people deserved this. He was not going to give this to them at any cost. So King Sangam was tortured to death, and then his child, Brotier, and his family were taken by the invaders and put onto a ship. Now, that ship first stopped in Barbados. When it stopped in Barbados, a lot of the people that were on the ship were sold as slaves to varying farms around the region, all but 4. And then it was time for the ship to make its way home to Newport, Rhode Island, where it had first originated from. And the 4 now enslaved people who had been captured from Africa, including Brotier, were brought into New England and sold for small sums of money or varying goods. Now, Brotier on this trip is also surviving unimaginable horrors. He wasn't sold in Barbados, and neither were the 3 others in New England with him, or the 60 who died in passage of smallpox outbreak that happened on this ship after his capture. So he survived smallpox. He's watched the death of his father, which he would say till his dying day, when even he was going blind, was one of the most horrific moments he could remember in his entire life. He survives all of this, and when he ends up in Newport, sold for a small sum, he's taken to an area of New York known as Montauk, and he's taken there by the first slave owner. Now, this slave owner of the Mumford family, according to Venture, was a gentleman who was, by all accounts, pleasant and kind to him. However, he did give him a lot of back-breaking labor with no breaks and no good treatment. So his definition of kind might not be our definition of kind. What was horrifying about Mumford in his time in New York is that his son was a bit on a power trip of some kind, and he would beat this gentleman that they have now renamed from Brotier to Venture, and he would beat him with a pitchfork to try and get him to do more work and to never rest and things like that. Of course, Brotier, now renamed as Venture, would never speak ill of that son, but he did document in his memoirs years later that he had endured this horrific treatment but bore no ill will to them. Now, the name change from Brotier to Venture took place, they say, on the merchant ships, and all of these passages that were taking place is when he gets his renamed Venture. But after he's with the Mumford family, he sees a little bit of transition from family to family throughout his life, as they consider themselves his owners, and they're buying him for sums of money. But for a terrible time, he is in Stonington, Connecticut. And when he's in Stonington, Connecticut, he belongs, at that time, to a man named Thomas Stanton. And Thomas Stanton is not known for his great treatment of the enslaved and his big property, of which he owns many slaves. Well, it is on this property that our young Venture does meet the love of his life, a woman named Margaret, affectionately called Meg, and he does marry her when he is 22 years old. But of course, after this marriage to Meg, who was enslaved by Thomas Stanton as well, gets into a bit of a fight with Thomas Stanton's wife. And Thomas Stanton's wife begins to whip and hurt Meg. When Venture hears this, he breaks into the room where this is happening and he tries to stop what's going on. Please don't hurt her. Let's talk about this. But then what happens? The wife turns on Venture and starts slapping him with all of these weapons that she can find. And just days later, her husband, enraged that he would break in and disturb his wife if she was trying to punish the enslaved, comes up to Venture with a boat oar and smacks him until he's beaten bloody with it, but still survives. Venture and Meg know not what else to do, so Venture tries to plan an escape. And there is an Irish indentured servant who says that he can break some of them out. And they go out on this trip, but then they get caught and found. Venture thinks on his feet, and he blames the Irish indentured servant for taking them out there, brings him back, and saves kind of his good graces and his wife's good graces. But he is not one to belong to these people anymore. He's got to try and escape this terrible white master. So he is sold from person to person around the New London area, getting involved in merchant business and the like as he is enslaved. Now, throughout this time, He continues his relationship with his wife, and she continues to bear children for him during this time, who are now also born enslaved. He is going to have in his life 4 children, and the first 2 are going to be boys, and then he's going to have a girl and then a younger boy years later. Now, what happens is when he's in New London for a time, he finally gets a new owner, and the owner says to him, I am going to give you money for the labors that you do so that you can buy your freedom. So he worked for money, making it still technically enslaved, but a little bit different. And of course, this master's name was Mr. Smith. And Venture decided at that moment, when he secured his freedom, having saved his money, all the best that he could, that he was going to take Smith as his last name in honor of that man. And that is how we come to know him as Venture Smith. Now, when Venture Smith gets his freedom, we are talking in the 1760s. So he's about 40 years old when he is free for the first time after being enslaved at age 7. And he moves to Long Island. He had been familiar with the area from having been on Montauk, and he owns a bit of land there and makes investments. And he brings with him his sons, Solomon and Cuff, and he brings them because he had made enough money to buy their freedom too. But one of his sons decided that he was going to take a bit of a dangerous trip. Now, Venture didn't want this by all means. Venture had enlisted Solomon to work for a shipyard, work for a man, make some money so that he could be well equipped and outfitted with all of the skills of a working man of that age. And he had outfitted a whaling boat and gotten nice shoe buckles, and he agreed to go on this big ship trip and make all of this merchant expedition. Venture begged Solomon not to go, begged him. And sure enough, Solomon goes out to sea and never returns, and Venture never sees him again, the ship having been lost and he being a casualty of it. Also of note regarding his son Solomon, I mentioned that his wife is pregnant with another baby, gives birth to a son, and guess what that son's name is going to be? Solomon, named after the son that they lost and who had perished so tragically and maybe unexpectedly, but Solomon, who you will see near the graves of Venture and Meg, is the youngest son named after the oldest son. He has his son Cuff, and then he gets his daughter and his wife purchased and brings them home. Now he's purchased a bit of a plot in Stonington, Connecticut, ironically, or not so ironically, depending on how you look at it, bordering the Stanton property where he was once enslaved. Perhaps a little showing of where he was in his life and how many jobs he could do. But when his daughter Hannah comes, she becomes quite ill. Venture and the family try to treat her, and his daughter Hannah dies. And now at this point, Meg is pregnant with their 4th child, and he has one older son. And he decides he's going to sell the land in Stonington because he started getting parcels of land up here in Haddam Neck in the East Haddam area. He's building a blacksmith shop, an area for fishing, an area for carpentry, a home. He gets over 100 acres as a property owner, a black property owner here in Haddam Neck. Now, he also purchases a great deal of enslaved peoples to work for him while he is here in East Haddam. Some of them do request to leave. He would pay hundreds of what would be dollars today for these enslaved people, but some of them requested to go back to their old masters, and some even ran away. So there was a bit of a wary eye looking on Venture, but Venture kept doing the best he could to help his family survive and to bring them as much success and as property as they could in this area. Now, to recap for you at this point, Venture was an African child kidnapped after his father was murdered in front of him, brought through a smallpox outbreak, brought to Newport, Rhode Island, where he was sold into slavery, and he was sold from New York to Stonington to New London to varying areas around Connecticut, where he worked for his own freedom. He survived being beaten by pitchforks and being beaten by boat oars. He helped save his wife from being beaten, lost 2 children when he was trying to help them battle illness or getting working jobs. And all of this, he still stands to tell the tale as an elderly man to the New London Bee when he's in his 60s and he's going blind. Now, people don't really know how he wrote his memoirs for the New London Bee because he was not a man that was considered literate, meaning not able to read or write. So some folks have different theories as to who wrote for him. But in his early 60s, he made sure to send all of these memoirs as best he could. And then some claims start coming out against him. And he addresses these in the memoirs too. There were ships, merchant ships, similar to what he ran and what he worked on, who lost some molasses outside of what we consider Old Saybrook today. He was then charged with the crime of throwing away the white man's molasses. But he goes to the New London Bee and he claims that he was not there, which they are able to prove that he was not there, and that he is still seen, despite being a property owner and contributor to society, as nothing more than a black dog. And he says this to the public. And at first, there's a bit of a stir, but Venture commanded respect, and respect is what he got. Now, he bought his farm here at Haddam Neck in 1775, so just around the time of the American Revolution. And that's when he had expanded from 10 acres to 130 acres by 1778. This is where he lived the remainder of his life. For the next 20 years, he would pass in in the early 1800s. He did his talk to the New London Bee in 1798. Now, there are wonderful celebrations of Venture Smith here in East Haddam and in Stonington too. Here they have Venture Smith Day in September, where descendants come and gather and share the stories of Venture and Meg and take pictures with them. There's tales of him being the first property owner, the first black property owner in Connecticut, one of the first freed enslaved peoples in all of Connecticut who worked for his freedom. His story is one that is second to none, and he is honored here in East Haddam and throughout Connecticut. So take some time, look up all that Venture Smith endured that I can't tell you in just one Cemetery Saturday, and come to visit him, see the beautiful Connecticut Valley sandstones that are engraved for him, and talk about him and his life. As you can see, it says, sacred to the memory of Venture Smith, an African. Though the son of a king, he was kidnapped. It tells you there right on there. In his industry, he acquired money to purchase his freedom. He dies in 1805. His wife died 4 years later. You can read here about everything that he grew here. He had 20 boats, canoes, sailing vessels, 2 fishing businesses, and a commercial orchard. He did all of this, including helping out by letting some of his buildings be used in his memory. Perhaps this was something he alluded to as Underground Railroad locations. Now, here in East Haddam, there's a lot of talk about where his property was. There is a wildlife preserve in Pawcatuck where he briefly owned property. However, here in Haddam, what they believe is the Connecticut power station was built on the area where Venture once lived. And there's actually a great article by Eric Lehman in the Estuary magazine that shows a beautiful picture of what his property looked like. But they did find out about his property through archaeological digs in the area, and were able to find out where, the blacksmith shop was, and where varying parts of his parcels on the 130 acres were. So maybe something to drive by. We're probably going to take a drive by and see if we can't see anything, though the Connecticut Power Plant is probably taking up a great deal of it. But definitely come here, visit Venture, see where he lived, and remember his story. Thank you so much for joining us on this Cemetery Saturday. We hope to see you again next week for Spooky Story Sunday. And don't forget, if you are in the New England area, come and visit us for some tours in Mystic, or check out our website to see if you want to do some tours across the country or even abroad in Ireland. Have a great holiday weekend, everyone.